So what is being presented tonight, I'm going to leave you with a single question, and that is how the city does business in terms of its capital projects, how it pays for it, how it maintains it. We can either basically do what we do today, which is we save enough cash and figure out what projects we can afford or must do for the year, and the others wait, and they have a tendency to build up. And at budget time, council goes through a lot of consternation, and as does staff, about what do we do. So with that, I'm just going to leave you in that mindset here is how do we do things? Do we continue to build up cash, allow the city to borrow money to take care of infrastructure projects and move forward? So, Tom Coleman, acting city manager.
All right, thank you, Stu. And thank you for coming out tonight. Tonight is the third of 9 planned town halls and a few one-offs that we're doing from here and there. So I apologize, I'm going to try and stick on script so I make sure I cover the same things at each meeting. Hopefully each of you had a chance to look at the boards before we started. I know some people came in right a few minutes ago, so you didn't. But like Stu said, my name's Tom Coleman. I'm the acting city manager, normally the public works director. We're going to go over a few of the more frequently asked questions tonight that we've been getting about the referendum, about the city's infrastructure, and the general process that we'll have to follow in order to do the referendum. Then we're going to provide an overview of the projects that we're asking to have included in the referendum. We'll move into a financial discussion with our finance director on why we think debt makes sense to pay for these. And we'll review some of the available funding sources that we can use for the different project types. And then we'll finish up with some question and answers. These are the people you'll be hearing from tonight. Myself, Dave Del Grande, our finance director, Tim Filaski, he's the acting public works director, and Joe Spadafino, who's the parks and recreation director. Tonight you're going to hear Dave and I, and probably Tim and Joe, reference the word capital a lot. In regards to our spending and budgeting. So I figured I better define what capital is. Capital is very specifically defined in our charter as any project or equipment, including any extension or addition thereto or thereof, having a life expectancy in excess of or to be financed over a period greater than 6 years or a value exceeding $20,000. That's great. What are some examples? For us, capital projects are usually things like what you see here. Infrastructure. The large majority of our capital spending is going to be on items like this, mainly because these items are really expensive. We have a lot of them, and like your house or your car, they need to be maintained or replaced periodically. So how much infrastructure do we have? We have a lot. I'm going to walk through each of our utilities and give you a quick overview so you can have an idea of the scale. We have the most water infrastructure by a large margin, and most of these items are quite expensive. For example, it costs us around $1.2 million to replace 1 mile of small diameter water main, like what you have in front of your house, 6 or 8 inch pipe. In total, the replacement value of our water infrastructure we estimate to be around $200 million if we had to replace everything that's there today. That's almost $6,000 of water infrastructure for every resident in the city, and that's just water. We also have a lot of sewer infrastructure. Sewer's a little less expensive to replace than water, because it can be more easily rehabilitated. It is deeper, more expensive to actually dig up, but there are trenchless technologies that we can use to restore the pipe without having to dig the whole thing up. We estimate the value of our sewer infrastructure to be around $67 million, or the replacement value rather. Stormwater is a little more expensive than sewer. It's a lot bigger diameter. And stormwater is also unique because we have different materials for our pipes that have dramatically different life expectancies, to the point that we track them and handle them completely separate. Corrugated metal pipe, it lasts about 35 to 40 years, and we have around 5 miles of that we know of. That's the pipe that's of most concern to us as a city because it's all approaching or beyond its expected life. The rest of our pipes generally reinforced concrete pipe, which is expected to last around 100 years, or a high-density polyethylene, kind of that black rib plastic pipe, which also lasts around 100 years. In addition to our pipes and catch basins and things like that, the drainage in your streets, we have 65 city-maintained stormwater ponds and stormwater facilities that we have to maintain. We expect our stormwater infrastructure is about $100 million. Our electric infrastructure is made up of substations, power lines, transformers, our McKees solar facility off Cleveland Avenue. This is, I would say, our least confident replacement value, because we've been just working the numbers up now. We estimated it's at least $50 million, probably a lot more than that, but we want to be conservative in the number that we put up. In addition to our traditional utilities, we also have parking infrastructure consisting of all our downtown parking lots and meters. Our parking fund is treated the same as a traditional utility, so the money is held in a separate enterprise fund. It's segregated from the general fund, and then we transfer a profit margin over to the general fund each year. Lastly, we have our general fund infrastructure, which is our city-maintained streets, city hall, police station, parks, and other city-maintained facilities. That's the infrastructure that's supported with your general taxes and fees. And the margin transfers, like I said, we transfer about 20% out of each of our utilities each year into the general fund to cover those general fund expenses. In total, we estimate the current replacement value of our infrastructure as a city at around $500 million. That's a huge number for a city of just over 33,000 people. That means we have over $15,000 worth of infrastructure for every resident of the city. The vast majority of it's underground, or at least out of sight or out of mind. So it's easy to forget about it until you hit a pothole with your car, or your toilet won't flush, or the lights go out. While it's helpful to know how much of everything we have, it's even better to know what condition it's in so we can plan. So what's the condition of our infrastructure? I'm going to go through each type in the same order, so you'll see we have different levels of information for each utility. Starting with water, I'm going to focus on mains because they make up the majority of our assets. Getting good condition assessment information on water mains is very difficult because they have to stay under pressure at all times to remain in service during the assessment. We've begun piloting some technologies that will allow us to indirectly measure the remaining life and the condition of the pipe, but we haven't implemented that widespread yet because it's expensive and it's new. In the meantime, we use a combination of our main break history, water quality complaints, pipe age, pipe material, and industry guidelines to estimate the remaining service life to prioritize our replacement. As I'll show in the next few slides, a lot of our water mains are going to hit or exceed their expected lifespan and expire in the near future. It's important to note that expiring doesn't mean the pipe will stop working. I'll explain that a little more later. This is what we like to refer to as the bathtub diagram, and it shows a general failure pattern for pipes. You often get a quick round of failure right after it's installed when any manufacturing defects might break or wear and pop early. And then you get a nice long constant failure rate phase where you might fail every 20 years or 15 years. And then once it gets near the end of its service life, the break rate kind of exponentially picks up and it starts to fail more often. For water mains, that's most often due to corrosion. The expected life varies depending on the pipe material and manufacturing methodology and the installation methods. The longer the material, the life, the longer you have in this nice section there. So one weird thing with water mains is that older isn't necessarily always worse. So our oldest mains, in like what we have in Main Street, installed before World War I, turn of the century. Our Main Street main was put in the 1800s. They have an expected life of 100, 120 years or more because they were very thick. The manufacturing methods weren't great, so they had to build them robust. Mains that were installed in the middle of the 20th century have a much shorter life, sometimes as low as 55 years, depending on the soil conditions and the way they were installed. And then the water mains we've installed since 2016 or later should be back up above 100 years because we're using more advanced laying practices and wrapping them in basically like a plastic bag to keep the soil off the pipe and prevent corrosion. So this slide gets into what I mentioned earlier about a pipe expiring. The green line is the cost to operate the pipe. So as you can see, with age, it gets more expensive to operate. And that's due to main breaks as it starts to fail more frequently. At a certain point, the failure rate gets high enough that it costs more to operate than it does to replace. And that would be the kind of your debt service payment for a replacement pipe. And that's the break-even point where it starts to make more sense to replace it than to just keep operating it. When you'll hit that break-even point depends on a lot of things, like I mentioned earlier, the pipe material, manufacturing, and a lot on soil conditions. We're working right now to develop an accurate estimate for the age of all 140 miles of our pipe. That's going to take a long time. For the sake of this presentation, I'm going to show you information using recommendations from the American Water Works Association, or AWWA, which is to assume 70 years average life for water mains. We feel that based off areas of the city where we're experiencing advanced break rates, that's pretty accurate for Newark, or at least for a lot of areas of Newark, or at least accurate enough to give us an average idea of our conditions. So this is a map of our water system. I'll bring this one up a little closer. Tim, if you want to hold that closer so you can actually see it. The water mains have been color-coded based on the expected remaining life. So all the pipes that are in red have already expired, and the pipes in orange, yellow, and light blue are set to expire in the next 15 years. There are some mains in here that are listed as expired, like Main Street, that likely do have service life left, despite being over 110 years old. But there are also some shown with remaining life that are already likely in the expired category. Because of that, try not to focus too much on the specific locations and think of it more like the magnitude of each category. All right, thanks, Tim. Today, about 15 miles of mains are in the expired category in the city. That's about 12% of our system. And then what we've done is we've taken all the mains in the system and broken them into 5-year buckets. So looking at all our pipes, in the next within 15 years, we will have 74 miles expired, absent some continued or increased effort to replace water mains. That's over half of the system, 57%. It'll be 59 miles expired even if we hit our current target of replacing 1 mile a year, and that'll be 42% of the system. And this is only our distribution system. It's not our raw water system that carries water from our wells and intakes to the treatment plants. Based on a recent study by Utah State University, the nationwide average is 16% expired, so we're doing a little better than the rest of the country. But that's going to change considerably in the next 10 or 15 years when these kind of echoes, it's almost like an infrastructure echo of a building boom following post-World War II, comes through the city, and we'll be in significantly worse shape soon. So what does this mean for Newark? Well, we should plan for more main breaks and interruptions in service. This is a chart of the number of water mains per year going back as far as we have records, 1977. There's a definite trend, which is going to accelerate as a larger percentage of our mains move into that expired category. Each one of these breaks is generally accompanied by a service outage for people in the immediate area, occasionally by a boil water order. I know at least 2 people in the crowd here have had to deal with that. And they have a negative impact on the quality of life and, if near a business, on their revenue. Like I said, the pipes don't stop working, they just stop working well. Moving on from water mains, starting in 2011, the city began increasing water rates from artificially low rate that was in place prior to that, which allowed for a capital project initiative to go underway. We really started pumping up our capital maintenance efforts. While water mains make up the majority of our infrastructure in a dollar amount, these other facilities have a much shorter life, like our water treatment plants, these more like 30 years, so they punch above their weight from a budget perspective. We've been really busy over the last 7 years, and we've completed over $17 million in water fund capital projects. We also have 2 water treatment plant projects that are either currently underway or are expected to be completed in the next 12 months. The first is replacing our pH adjustment system at South Wellfield to a new, lower cost, more effective system. The second was just approved by council at the last meeting to convert from chlorine gas to a bulk liquid system, like what we have at South Wellfield. It's much safer and more consistent. So we are still doing projects despite the current effort with the referendum. On the sewer side, we've been working to inspect and develop a prioritization for rehab work. Sewer is much easier to inspect. So far, we've inspected about 15% of the system, and in that 15%, we've identified around $4 million worth of repairs, high priority repairs that need to be made. We began making many of these repairs during 2017, and we have another project underway right now, actually. Since 2011, we spent nearly $4 million on sewer capital projects. We've rebuilt all of our sewer pump stations to modern standards. On the stormwater side, as I mentioned earlier, we've been focused on corrugated metal pipe, which has a much shorter expected life than concrete, and we've been experiencing failures all over the city. Starting in 2016, we completed a citywide assessment of all the known corrugated metal pipe and prioritized it for repairs. In total, we identified $3.4 million of necessary repairs over the next 10 years. As many of you are aware, or you may be aware, Council authorized the creation of a stormwater utility, which is effective January 1st of this year. But because of that, we have a stable funding source that's been designed to provide an adequate amount of money to meet our operating expenses and complete these repairs over the next few years. The current rate, however, will not cover the cost of the proposed Rodney project, which would result in the need to increase the median household stormwater bill by a little over $1 a month. We'll get into that later. For our road network, we have a full pavement management program that where we complete an annual inspection of all the roads in the city. We rate them, and then we run them through an optimization program in an effort to develop an optimal project. If we want to keep the city-maintained roads, that's not Main Street or Delaware Avenue or those ones that are in terrible condition, all the neighborhood streets and ones that don't have a road number, if we want to keep them the same as they are today on average across the whole city, we need to be spending about $1.75 million a year every year, a number we've only been able to achieve one time since 2011. In addition to that, we have $1.5 million in parks capital maintenance that's taking care of things that exist today, scheduled over the next 5 years, needs to get done. So how did we get ourselves into this position? One of the reasons is we've been using cash, and only the cash that we have on hand, which limits our ability to tackle large projects because they crowd out smaller, less sexy replacement projects and preventative maintenance. It's a lot more exciting to have a new ribbon cutting than replacing an underground pipe that's generally worked the whole time you've been alive. Our water and sewer rates are also entirely consumption-based, so they fluctuate considerably with the weather, results in a less predictable revenue stream. That's something we're working with council to address. And nearly 50% of Newark's land area is tax exempt, which puts us in a deep hole that we have to dig out of when it comes to pay for general fund services like police. As I mentioned earlier, we start to fill this hole by transferring about 20% of our gross revenue from each of the utility funds into the general fund. That's money that could have been used to pay for infrastructure maintenance. And we are entering the first round of the replacement era, which is really the biggest problem. Historically, we've never had to pay for most of the infrastructure that we have because it was paid for by developers or the federal government through grants. We're now approaching the first replacement cycle for most of our assets, which can really be thought as liabilities because we don't have a choice not to replace them. We can't just not fix the pipe in your road or not pave your street. Even the mains that were installed by the city or for the city were originally assessed directly against the property owners that adjoined the street where the main went in. Because of this, our tax and rate structure has never had to handle paying for these assets to be replaced. And our revenue demands are going to increase significantly over 20 years. So you can see that most of our initial installation was done by developers and priced into your house. The first person that bought the house paid for that main the first time. Federal government gave us a lot of grants back in the 70s. And on the transportation side mostly, there are a lot of 80-20 grants for 80% federal government, 20% city match. And then even these ones down here, like I said, City of Newark, we always assess that against the adjacent property owner. So we haven't had to pay for these ourselves. In addition to that, a large majority of Newark's been developed in an unsustainable development pattern. That's suburban style, single family homes. If you live in a single family detached home, I can almost guarantee you're not paying enough to cover the infrastructure necessary to support your house based on our current utility rates, structure, and tax levels. For example, if you live in a house with a 100-foot wide lot, your taxes need to support, in addition to police and other general fund expenses like trash collection, paving and maintenance of 50 feet of that street frontage. Same goes for a water, sewer, and electric infrastructure. Using our current cost for water main replacement, 50 feet of water main costs over $11,000 to replace. Assuming 10% of your water bill goes towards infrastructure, which is about our average, it'll take over 300 years for the average home to pay off the 50-foot piece of pipe in front of their house. That doesn't take into account the water treatment plants or booster stations or water tanks or any of the other infrastructure that goes into supporting that pipe. Fortunately, locations like the downtown and our industrial users are able to pick up a lot of that shortcoming. from the neighborhood areas. Whereas a house might take 300 years to pay off their section of Main, a building like 58 East Main Street, the one with Qdoba in it, will do it in about 2. We see a very similar pattern for taxes. So here's a map still in development that shows whether a property is paying enough in taxes to pay for just the general fund services it gets. While it's not complete yet, the general idea and scope is not likely to be significantly different once it's complete. Based on our preliminary estimates, all the parcels in red do not provide enough in tax revenue to cover the cost of providing them general fund services. Some may be closer than others, but none of them cover their costs. Parcels that have a positive value are shown in yellow, blue, and green. So you can see there the kind of the downtown areas, some of the townhouse areas. And that's what makes up the difference and balances the budget. As you can see, in general, single-family detached housing is negative, which means if we were to approve a new single-family detached neighborhood today, it will make us poorer as a community because we'll be taking on more liabilities than revenues. Higher density development like townhomes and downtown mixed-use projects, on the other hand, will help reduce the need for future tax increases because they pay for more than their fair share. I said this at the last one, I didn't at the first one. I don't expect everybody giving the side-eyed looks at their neighbors because they're in one of these red neighborhoods. I'm not saying that the red neighborhoods are bad, I'm just saying that we need to know that the red neighborhoods exist because the first thing to addressing a problem is acknowledging you have a problem. So we just want to avoid more of this, or at least if we build it, we need to build some more of that to offset it. So I know up until now the presentation's been a lot of doom and gloom, but it's not all bad news, and it's definitely not unique to Newark. Cities all across the nation are looking at the same problem, whether they know it yet or not. Illinois, for example, just determined they need $21 billion per year for infrastructure, when historically they've spent closer to $3. When you consider the entire state budget is just under $38 billion, you can see they're in a little bit of a problem. Fortunately for us, I think we're in a much better place than a lot of other cities for several reasons. First, there's a will on council to tackle the problem, which is why we're here today talking about taking on debt to get in front of it. We're also a relatively compact city compared to our peers. Dover, for example, has 2.5 times our land area, but only 10% more people than Newark. So they are in a much deeper hole than us. We're in the fortunate position to have the Star Campus, which is going to be bringing all new tax revenue to the city. Every private project that's completed there is tax revenue, it's utility sales, electric, some of them water, all of them sewer, and that's all utility sales that we didn't have before. So we never provided electric service to Chrysler. And those new sales will be able to offset some of these costs as we move forward in the future and as that site develops. Help us keep electric rates low. Maybe that offsets the fact that we have to raise some of our other rates. The university is also planning to add 4,000 grad students in the next 5 years and up to 1,500 undergraduates over the next 10 years. Graduate students are year-round young professional residents that would live and work in the city. So if we can provide them downtown housing, somewhere where they can walk to class, we can avoid a lot of our traffic and public school impacts that generally come around new development. Every 1% that we add to the tax base is 1% of revenue that doesn't have to come out of your pocket. At this point, I'm going to give it to Tim, and Tim's going to go over some of the projects that we've proposed for inclusion in the referendum.
Thank you, Tom, and I appreciate the opportunity to talk about this here. Today, again, I'm Tim Filaski, the Acting Director of Public Works and Water Resources. I'm typically the Deputy Director, but since Tom's acting as the City Manager, I'm acting as the Director of Public Works. And I'm gonna try to stay on topic as well here. I tend to ramble a little bit, but I will do my best to keep it brief. Many of the projects that you'll hear about tonight are ongoing projects or programs, what we call it, which you may have heard Tom or I talk if you've been to a council hearing or us bringing contracts to council in previous years. Others are overdue rehabilitation or upgrades to facilities that provide our water and other services throughout the city. I'll give you a high-level overview, but please feel free to reach out to Tom or myself after the meeting tonight or at any point in our we're typically at City Hall. If we're not, they know how to reach us to get a message to us. You'll see later that we have an email address set up. It is asknewark@newark.de.us. I believe it goes directly to the communications department, and they send it to who it needs to get to. So any questions you have, we can certainly answer those as quickly and as accurately as we can. So I'll get started with the water projects here. The Laird Track well field restoration is a large project and relatively new. I'll just have you look out the window a little bit, and you'll see, which if you all live in this area here, you'll see what is trees behind us. The Laird Track well field is basically wells that we can draw water from that is all in trees and woods and protected area. The South well field, which is our current groundwater system, is across from BJ's down on 72. So you can see the difference and why we would want to bring these wells back online as part of a long-term plan for sustainable water supply. Essentially, these were wells that were furloughed as the reservoir came online in 2006, I believe it was completed. These were wells that were furloughed in order to concentrate on filling the reservoir with water from the creek. They do have taste and odor issues, but they're easily addressed through some pre-treatment. We're hoping that we increase the drought resiliency to almost double the drought resiliency of the reservoir by adding these wells back into the supply mix. And again, they are some of the most protected areas of not just the city, but of the state. There's not the protection that the White Clay Creek Preserve in Pennsylvania and State Park in Delaware provide is extraordinary. The second one here is water SCADA. Luckily someone came up with SCADA instead of having to say supervisory control and data acquisition system each time. So, whoops, sorry. It is basically a way that we can be in two places at one time. That helps us. We have a water plant operator on call or on staff 24 hours a day, and it's typically just one. And we have 2 treatment plants, multiple tanks, multiple pumps that all need to be running in sync at one time. So the SCADA system would allow someone to log into either on their computer or smartphone, tablet, and be able to look at how our system is running and how it's operating, and make changes on the fly if necessary. This is a big project that we've been going for about 20 years, but we really hit it hard in the last 2 years, and we're making some great progress. There's a nice picture there on the wall there that shows it actually shows this area here. There's the Levier's tank, and then the concrete tank that's just by the woods at Levier's. There, the second one down on the water projects. And as I mentioned before, we have the South Wellfield treatment plant upgrades contemplated. So as many of you may know, we do, unfortunately, the site, the groundwater itself was listed on the national priorities list, which is what many of you may know as the Superfund site. The good news is we can treat the contaminant very easily through an air stripper, which is what's shown there on the system. Basically, it takes the contaminants out of the water, and we have an air permit to release them into the air. But we have unfortunately, this is coming to the end of its life, its useful life. As Tom mentioned, it hasn't stopped working, but it has been degraded somewhat. So we need to have a plan to replace that. And while we're replacing that, we have some tanks that need to be upgraded, and we also need to modernize the treatment process slightly. And lastly, on water, we have water tank maintenance. So if you look down the hill here in Windy Hills, there's a water tank that was recently renovated. It's nice and shiny white now. It was a kind of a dull blue. We have 5 more tanks that all have lead coating on them, and we need to either get the lead coating off and repaint them, or we need to just take the tank down and build a new tank. Shockingly, it is about the same price, so we really have to do our due diligence to make sure we select the proper technology to make these changes.
Lead's on the outside.
Yes, sorry. The lead is on the outside. The inside is coated with a non-lead based. So the water is fine, everything's fine, but the tanks have lead coatings on the outside. So moving on to sewer, this is actually one big program that is broken up into several different processes along the way. So we call it the sanitary sewer study and rehabilitation. Essentially, we do closed circuit television monitoring of videotape of the sewer line, which gives us the defects in all of the sewer lines, which basically it gives a grade to all the defects that it finds and gives an overall grade to the system. We're able to then take that data, prioritize, and then come up with a list of repairs and rehabilitation that's necessary. So as Tom said, about 15% of what we've inspected has yielded $4 million in repairs that are necessary. So these are big ones, and like Tom said, there's one going on right now. You'll probably, if you drive close to Main Street on Thursday or Friday, they'll probably have part of McKee's Lane closed. They're going to be doing one of these, and Stu, we're going to reach out to the council folks to see if they want to actually see one of these things go in. So look for that invitation. It should be. So, but as Tom also mentioned, we haven't stopped working. We've completed about $1 million worth of these type of repairs in the last year, mostly getting the sewers repaired on Main Street ahead of the full restoration that DelDOT plans for later this year into 2019. Main Street will be, so it's a complete reconstruction, so there will be headaches. But when it's all said and done, it'll be a smooth road, and every 10 to 15 years, it'll be a quick mill and overlay. It'll be very quick. So a lot of pain in the next year and a half on Main Street, but we will get through it.
They're going to do some patching sooner.
Yes. So the patching that they're going to do in June is not the full fix, but it's the fix that's going to carry us through. So just be patient, and I can't promise, but it'll be a lot better. So now we'll move on to stormwater. Many of you, this is probably one of the projects that a lot of people don't equate with the other projects. This is a completely new project that not only does it solve a problem that we have here in the city, but it also does it with some style. So I've mentioned before in some of my presentations that no one should just see a hole in the ground. So we've brought parks along. So that's we have Joe threatened me that if we didn't put park on it, he wouldn't support it. So we have what we have here is this is the old Rodney dorm site. Just above that is the Oakland's neighborhood, and below that we have a drainage system that actually goes the end point to whatever any water that drops here actually ends up in Silverbrook. On the south side of what was Chrysler, now the Star campus, and then eventually into the Christina River. So, and that's about a one square mile drainage area, and this is the top 10% of that drainage area. So about 70 acres drains to this pond, and we're able to essentially take that out of the equation. The pipes on the downstream side of this are over capacity. So any capacity that we can open up by putting in this pond will open up capacity in the pipes below. We can get more water into the pipes below. So, this would be a wet pond. It's designed as a wet pond. It will always have water in it, and then it would have water circulation and plantings around the edge to keep the mosquitoes down, and also have native plantings so we get native birds and native animals to take care of the mosquitoes. So water, not only water quantity, but we're also looking at water quality. So we're under a federal mandate by the EPA we're responsible for the water quality in all of Newark. This is certainly a large section, like I said, a 1 square mile drainage area. It certainly will make a difference in the downstream drainage area, and these are the type of projects that we don't get this chance again. It is a university-owned property currently. But this location is opportune for us to knock on. I think Tom and I knocked each other down on the way to the manager's office when we heard that this was going up for sale, to let them know that this is certainly something that would benefit. So we added a little bit here because we got some questions about how far is this park necessary in this area. So and you can see here 6,000 residents live within a 15-minute walk. and 20,000 residents within a 10-minute bike ride. And that encompasses almost all of Main Street. It goes about to the Newark Shopping Center. So it includes a lot of the college area, as well as most of the neighborhoods that are immediately adjacent, Devon, the Bins, the Oaklands, the Nottingham area. So this also showcases a location that we don't really have any city-owned parkland in that vicinity. Now we know, a mile away there's the Hanloft Park, and then a mile up the road is Paper Mill Park, but that's still a mile away. That's the 10-minute walking distance. So we're looking at it to kind of fill a hole here with the park projects. So moving on to general fund projects. You heard Tom speak of general fund projects. These are the projects that are necessary for the operation of our city, yet always seem to get a lower priority ranking, as Tom mentioned earlier, and Stu brought up. They always seem to get a lower priority ranking simply because the utilities and things win out over these when we're looking at the budget and saying, okay, we have X amount of dollars, we can only do X projects. So what we see here is the ADA transition plan. That's all the new ramps with the red dots on them that allow wheelchairs and folks with other disabilities to navigate their way around the city. We try to be a walkable and bikeable city, and this certainly helps. We're also under a federal mandate similar to the stormwater to have a plan in place and actually follow that plan. We have done a great job of following the plan. We're down to about 400 ramps left. Don't quote me on the number, but we started off with about 1,200 to we have about 1,800 and we're down to about 400 left. So we're about 10 years away because we do about 40 a year with the funding that we're allocated. We joke that in 10 years when we finish, the federal government will come out with some new standard and we'll have to start all over again, but we'll cross that bridge when we get there. So the hard surface improvements, we've mentioned parks before. Parks are a major part of our city. We have Red Park just behind us, and then it leads down into the city, and the Reservoir Park and the Paper Mill Park, the Curtis Mill Park. There are a lot of improvements that need to go into those parks to make sure that they keep drawing people to our city and allow the folks in the city to utilize them. So this includes the courts, the trails, and the parking lots. We typically do the parking lots as part of our street improvement program, so we get better pricing, like kind of bulk pricing, and they throw these in. They're smaller parking lots that they're able to do for. We get very good pricing on those. As far as our maintenance yard, we have two items at our maintenance yard. These are operations that we that allow us to continue to use our vehicles and efficiently and properly with the truck lift system. And the field operation complex master plan is going to allow us to store some of that equipment under cover so that it doesn't rot away. Part of the field operations master plan allowed us to build a larger salt shed. Most folks, when it snows, they still have to get to work. They still have to get around town. They like to see the trucks out, and now we don't like to put out too much salt, but we know we have to put out enough salt to make it safe for everybody to drive. But this allowed us to have a year's worth of salt, at the ready all year long. We don't have to fight to get it off the barge in Wilmington. Again, parking lot surface maintenance. These are actual parking lots that folks pay to park in. If we have too many potholes or some is unavailable, that's revenue, and Dave will not allow us to let any revenue slip down the drain. So we certainly want to have enough. We certainly want to make sure that our parking lots are up to standard so that we can continue to pull that revenue from the parking fund. And the road repaving projects are similar to the ADA transition plan. We do an annual project to pave the roads, and as Tom mentioned, we have not hit our goal. We've only hit our goal once in the last 8 years of $1.75 million to just keep us where we are as they continue to deteriorate. So I think that is all for me. I'll turn it over to Dave, and he'll give you some of the meat and potatoes here. Thank you.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. I'm Dave Delgrani, the Finance Director. Thank you for your time this evening. So ultimately, why now? Why haven't we done this in the past? And what's our plan going in the future? The city's historically used cash to fund the majority of our capital needs. Debt financing accomplishes two main goals. One, that it fairly allocates the cost of the project over its useful life, and this allows everyone to pay their fair share of the cost of the project over the period of the assets being in use. The other is that long-term debt has a minimal impact on the annual budget, thereby keeping the city's annual revenue requirements as low as possible. Low needs for revenue translates directly into lower utility and tax rates and fees that the city must charge for the services that we provide. So we have three options for debt. We have the state revolving loan, bond financing, and your traditional bank loan, which I'll go into all the three. So the state revolving loan is the most advantageous method for us to use and to finance our water-related projects, which would be water, sewer, and stormwater. Due to their federal support, the state is able to offer low-interest loans on a competitive basis to all government agencies within the state of Delaware. And since these loans are competitive in nature, all applications are not always approved, so we need to have a backup plan if a state revolving loan doesn't work for us. The low interest and closing costs are associated with these loans, and they're low, and it makes it very attractive, especially when the rates in the bond market begin to rise. Another advantage of the program is that it also permits interest-only loans during the construction phase in order to provide budget relief to the agencies that are awarded the funds throughout the program. And due to our involvement in the state revolving loan program, it would also make us eligible for future grants for our water, sewer, and stormwater infrastructure, and projects, allowing us to work on projects we previously have not been able to. So if we're making a debt payment of, say, $400,000 a year and $200,000 of that is interest, we could conceivably receive a $200,000 grant every year back from the state to put towards other water, sewer, stormwater projects, which would then minimize the amount we would need to put cash up in the future for other projects. So it's a very advantageous for us to be a part of that program. If all of our water-related programs are not approved for a state revolving loan, our fallback plan would be to go to the bond market or with a bank loan. The bond market route is the most costly, but provides a lower interest rate than a traditional bank loan. And even with higher fees, a bond authorization is generally the least expensive when factoring in interest rates. The city currently benefits from a bond rating of AA+ from Fitch Ratings and AA2 from Moody's Investor Services, and we would need to be reaffirmed by these agencies if we were to go out to the bond market for a new authorization. So, as I said, the bond market is a little costly. Last time we went to the bond market was in 2011. It costs us about $110,000 to go through the process, whereas a loan would be a few $1,000s. So a bank loan is viable way for the city to consider. And although it may carry a higher interest rate than the bonds, it doesn't give us the high fees that go along with them, as I'd mentioned. So fees for our proposed bond could be $100,000 less by going with a bank loan. And if the referendum were to pass, a bank loan would be considered as a funding source. So here we are today. This is our current debt obligations. So as of today, we owe about $15 million in debt. And where that's coming from is a few things. The green bar that you see is the debt service that we're paying back annually on the reservoir, primarily. The blue bar going across is the debt that we're paying on the smart meters that we put in a few years ago. So our debt cliff is falling off a bit in 2022 into 2023 as the reservoir loan potentially is coming off the books. The small orange that you see across the top is our fiber project for our city-owned assets. We have a small loan on that, which just began for a 10-year period. And then also there's 2 years left, ending in 2019, a small loan for our parking equipment that we have. Okay, this slide reflects the projects that are included in the state revolving loan program. The state has already approved the Rodney project at $9 million, pending a successful referendum at a special interest rate of 2%. And the remaining water projects total $15,625,000 and all require state approval in order to be considered in the state program. One feather in the city's cap is the fact that we are already approved by DNREC for a $9 million authorization on the Rodney project. because they never approve projects that haven't been passed by the local referendum initially. Usually it requires a referendum passage and then the state will come in. But they saw the advantages of this program. They liked the project and they actually went against their normal grain and approved the project prior to it, the public and citizens approving it. So of course it's all pending on the referendum, of course, but it's nice to have that type of backing from the state on this project. And also, we were in competition for a 0% loan on the Rodney project, and we came in second. So unfortunately, we didn't get a ribbon on that one, but we got very close to a 0% loan, but 2% wasn't too bad either. The other loans will be around the 3% range is what we're anticipating. Okay. These are our bond and loan projects, which totals the $26,765,000 that we're seeking. So all these projects were discussed by Tim and Tom earlier, and ultimately what we're showing here is on this table and in the previous table is the years and what we anticipate to use those funds. So all these projects were approved by council in our 2018 to 2022 capital improvement plan. In total, we may have to do a little tweaking with council on some of the timing of the cash and when it's needed, and that'll be part of the process once we get past the referendum. So council again will have all these projects will be back in front of them at that point. So I add a little splash of color to this presentation, and this proposed referendum. This is our existing debt, which is the green tabs, the green section here. And ultimately, we're paying about $2.7 million a year in debt service out of our $87 million budget that we have in total. And our goal and objective was trying to stay in that $2.73 million range annually, so it fits into the budget and it doesn't have a large impact on our residents and our businesses. We came close based on the timing of the cash that when we're going to need it. And moving out to 2023, when the debt comes off, that's when a lot of the new projects will be completed, bringing up the debt service payment again. These are all estimates based on what we project to happen. It's not an actual finalized as to when it could happen. We're working to work on this little triangle here with this little inverted triangle there and try to smooth things out a bit. I like rectangles and squares and things in my charts. But our goal was to make it a predictable method in our debt service projects, in our capital projects, and having debt service as a part of that program helps the city with its annual cash needs and requirements, which then helps all of our residents. Ultimately, what has happened is over the past 3 years, we've brought in 94% of revenue for water and sewer fund. And if my kids came home every day with a 94 on their test, I'd be thrilled. But 94% means we were 6% short. And that 6% short over 3 years in water and sewer totaled $3 million that we didn't have available to us in cash to work to do these projects, which were part of approved budgets. So because we were now short in cash, we had to hold other things and move things around and delay timing, and it also impacts what we come to council with in future years for other capital projects. So not having an accurate measurement and bringing in our revenue from water and sewer is directly impacting what we can do in the future in our capital projects. The main reason being our water and sewer rates are 100% consumption based. So if you happen to go on vacation for a week, there's no water being used in your house, you get a zero bill for that week. But still, the city has infrastructure expenses to provide you water when you need it, when you come home, and that expense doesn't go away. If we pay cash and decide not to go to the bond market at all and forget about the state revolving fund, this is what our requirements would be. So now our debt service was down in this range. Now we're looking at almost over $12 million in 2019 that we have to squeeze out of something. I'm pretty good at finding a dollar. I don't know how good I can be at finding 12 million of them, or 13 million of them. And also the regularities that it creates year over year. This year we need a huge rate increase. Next year that rate will come down because we got the money last year for the project. So I can imagine all your faces when you got your bill in the mail and you saw a huge spike, and then 365 days later, the bill is drastically different from what you got the month before. So we're trying to put some regularity and predictability into our rate structure, and also it helps you all with your own budgeting process at home. So assume nothing changes, and what would our estimated tax and utility rates look like had we continue with these projects? So I had some colors on those previous charts. This is getting into the percentages now. So 2018, this is where we are today. And what we did was we took the average water consumption for a resident and the average tax bill for our resident and used those as comparisons to create these percentages here. So ultimately, using cash, which is the block at the top, you would see an overall change in your total bills to Newark of 12.7%. But water would be going up 26.6, stormwater 107, 18.9, you get the picture. But then when you move in the out years, when these projects are coming near completion, now you're seeing reductions, 18, minus 15, minus 75%. And so you're seeing 12.7, 2%, minus, to get you back down to this again. And this is hypothetical just based on these projects, not the city's entire budget. So we're just taking this piece here. If you move it down to financing through debt, where we can predict what our debt service is going to be year over year, it really brings those numbers down to almost, I want to say zero, but they're looking pretty good. So in 2019, you're looking at 1% increases. This 36.9 is equal to $1 on the stormwater fund. That's the Rodney project, which will be by itself. But if you take out the Rodney project, everything else is 1%, except for water, you're at 2.6 and 2.6. So annualized over the year, you're seeing a 1% increase, a 0.4, a 0.5, and a 0.8. To me, as a budget officer for the city, I'd much rather build this into my budget and explain this to council, knowing what my debt service is going to be and where our cash flow is due to that, than come to council year over year with this going on. Now, moving those percentages to dollars, this is what it's going to look like in dollars and cents based on our current debt. So the average Newark resident today is paying $276 a month to the city for water, sewer, stormwater, and electric, and taxes, broken down to a month. So you would see a $35 increase in 19, $6.20, then a reduction, $23, a reduction of $18 in 21 and 22. Going with debt financing, you're going to see increases of $2.70, as I mentioned earlier, and then $1.46, $2.33. So in a lot of these numbers, going with debt financing, we're able to use other revenue sources that are not related to the rates that you're paying to help come up with some of these cash needs. So you may not even see this type of reaction year over year in your pocketbook, depending on other revenue sources the city has or is able to achieve going out in the next 5 years. Okay, and just one last thing which I did not mention before I switch back over to Tom. The debt financing method is a preference on my end, mainly due to the equity and fairness of the projects themselves. If you're sticking with Rodney for an example, the Rodney Stormwater Pond Park has a useful life of well over 50 years. For us to go to the bond market or obtain a state revolving loan and debt finance that over a 20, 30-year period, it takes the cost of that project itself in the whole and charges fairly to every person using that pond over the next 30 years. So those of us who are here today are not footing the whole bill for the $8 million project in 1 or 2 years while that project is under construction. We're able to take that now and allocate it evenly over the next 20 to 30 year period. So it's a smaller chunk that we all pay a fair share of. So if you all decide to move, or if your children or your grandkids who may not be paying taxes yet, or our new residents who are coming into the city 10 years from now, they're going to be using the park as well, and they should be paying a fair share of that park. So bringing debt into our capital plan is an acceptable form of financing our large projects like this. So at this point, I will turn it over to Tom. Thank you.
Thanks, Steve.
Could I ask a question about slide 44?
Yeah.
Two different scenarios, basically the same end result.
Correct.
But I can understand the financing aspect of it. You prefer, I think we all prefer level pricing and cost.
Right.
My question is, the bottom portion which is debt financing, the top part being cash.
Mm-hmm.
If we want the debt financing, it seems like that would free up a lot of cash.
Correct.
That would enable you guys to.
Yeah, and that's a great question, and I thank you for bringing that up. We also have a policy on our reserve requirements for the city, having a 60-day reserve for anything that may pop up here or there, emergency requirements, those types of things. And the city has not been meeting its reserve levels as we need to for a city of our size. So by going to the debt market, it's going to help us change some ways we do business internally that help us get to the cash reserve requirements that we need and have them at a level that are at the recommended requirements by our peers. So it's a great point, and that's one of the main reasons that we're looking to free ourselves a little bit of the cash needs year over year to give us the ability to take a little bit of breath, change the way we collect our revenues and how we bill and so forth. And then once we get to the end of this 5-year period, we should be in a better situation now where we can start blending a larger portion of the cash into our capital plan with a little debt mixed in here and there as we go out into the larger projects. Thank you.
All right, so what's the process from here? In Newark, our charter spells out explicitly the procedure that we have to follow for a referendum. So back on April 23rd, Council set a resolution, or passed a resolution rather, setting May 14th as the public hearing where they'll consider the various projects for inclusion. So if you come out this coming Monday, you can voice your opinion to your council person about whether or not you think any of these particular projects should be included or whether or not they should be doing it at all. At that time, council will pass another resolution that finalizes the actual questions that'll be on the ballot. Then per charter, we have a very specific window of time where we have to advertise within. We're going to be doing advertising much more than just what's the minimum required. Then on June 19th would be the actual vote. And then these other ones are more administrative on our side. Yes?
The resolution is available on our website today.
Okay.
Because the council meetings within 7 days.
Okay.
If anybody wants to see what the proposed questions are with the numbers, my resolution's out on the website now. Under city council agenda for
May 14th. Yeah. Yes. So actually, thank you for reminding me, Sue. I will. We have a city website up for this process, newarkde.gov/vote. So everything referendum related is there. I'll have that resolution put up on the /vote page also. Tim mentioned this earlier. We have a specific website email address set up. Now this, you can ask any question you want. We set it up mainly for this, but we've made the title very generic, just ask Newark. So if you have any question about anything Newark related, you can send it to that email address and we'll get it to the right person and get you an answer. So with that, just open it up to questions. Any questions you might have about the whole thing, yes?
If we didn't do the Rodney project, what would be the impact?
Okay, so that's a common question we've gotten. What happens if the Rodney project either isn't included in the referendum or fails? So there are a few things that could happen. So we're under contract with the university to purchase the property. We're under contract and we've got it locked in, I think, for five more years. And in that, there's a procedure that we could purchase it with cash. And I think it's $500,000 a year, and we could buy the property. The way the contract is set up, the total purchase price is $2.1 million, and we can deduct up to $700,000 of our demolition and asbestos and brownfield remediation costs that aren't refunded to us by the state. So if we just purchased it, we might be able to pay cash for it. We'd have to delay some other projects or find $500,000 a year cash to purchase it. We wouldn't get the discount until such time that we actually demoed the buildings. But we would lose the 2% interest rate that we have locked in with the state right now for the bigger project because they wouldn't hold it indefinitely for us. But we could still purchase it. And then we
One thing
just...
that we failed to mention, or I failed to mention, is almost 100% of the cost outside of a match for a planning grant has been that we've expended on the Rodney project so far to get to where we are now. It has been either a grant or funding through the Brownfields program from the state. So very little actual city dollars other than the commitment to the university has come from city.
Yeah, so we've outlaid $50,000 to the university basically to lock in that contract at this point. So at the 1-year anniversary of when we signed the contract last year, we basically locked in the $50,000. So if we decide not to put this on the referendum, we owe the state $50,000 through that grant that we got. We basically have to pay, or no, we'd owe all 100. Sorry, we'd owe them $100,000. If it goes on the referendum and fails, we don't have to pay any of it. If it goes on the referendum and passes, they take half of it and roll it into the loan.
And the other half is a grant.
Yeah, and the other half becomes a grant. It was a $100,000 loan. So it's in our interest at this point to definitely put it on the referendum. So the other option, let's say it goes to referendum and it fails, council decides that the feedback from the public was it's a project that we don't want to do. We could basically get out of the contract with the university for any reason we want, and the university would put it back on the market like they did with the Dickinson property. So we're only really interested in the Rodney parcel. There are 2 properties over there. There's Rodney dorms and the Dickinson dorms. The Dickinson dorms are kind of on a higher point, whereas Rodney's in a funnel, so it makes a lot more sense for us to purchase it from the stormwater perspective. The Dickinson property, we've been told, sold for north of $8 million. So we got a pretty good deal with the university at, in theory, 1.4 if we actually build it and demo the whole thing. The underlying zoning for the Rodney property is RM, which is 16 units per acre, garden apartments. So in theory, I think you could fit north of 110 units on that property. So it would probably end up some sort of apartment building, student housing, if I had to guess.
So, and also, if I could add, if the Rodney project doesn't go through, we still have the stormwater issue.
Yeah, and that's important.
Yeah.
Impact on the infrastructure
Okay.
if we don't do that project.
Okay, so that's another good question. So it's, our storm sewer pipes don't really, they generally align with these because it's roads. So Rodney is here, and we have some really bad flooding issues over in Devon, the Bins, to a lesser extent here in the Old Newark area, and then they have some pretty bad flooding during bigger storm events down in Silverbrook. I was actually taken aback how bad the flooding is in Devon and Bins, and it's not the storms you'd think that have really bad flooding. So we have pretty well established floodplains for big hurricanes, and you know where the flooding is going to happen when it's a hurricane. Over here on Rahway Drive is going to flood, that sort of thing. What we have here in Devon and the Bins are the smaller, high intensity, lower rainfall amount storms. So like the summer thunderstorms will overwhelm the pipe system in Devon and the Bins. And we had, Tim and I had a gentleman come in and tell us that the water was up to the side view mirrors on his truck, and we didn't believe him at all. So he came back a few days later with pictures of the water up to the side view mirrors on his truck. So the only way we're going to be able to fix that problem is realistically putting in bigger pipes that can get the water off the road. The problem is if we put in bigger pipes here, it's going to make the flooding down here even worse, and these people are already flooding. So if we want to put in bigger pipes, we have to find somewhere to hold water back to free up capacity in the existing pipe system so we don't send down kind of coincident peaks, a peak of water from here in these new bigger pipes lining up with the peak that's coming through here. So if Rodney doesn't happen, realistically the only way we would ever be able to tackle this problem down here is through either converting Phillips Park into a big drainage pond, and it's all wetlands, which would be a challenge for sure, or going through and purchasing properties in strategic locations over time and trying to amass a group of properties big enough to do basically the same thing that we're doing up here in one property. We did some preliminary numbers. It would be significantly more expensive because we'd be buying homes. I think Newark Post quoted us as saying eminent domain. We would never eminent domain properties for this. But because of that, it would take probably 20 or 30 years. You have to wait for everybody to move out of their houses to be able to buy. And you'd be putting in a lot more pipes as well. So we feel that this is going to be the most cost-effective method for us to tackle this flooding problem down here.
Okay, that was very helpful, and I realize this is more or less a financing discussion.
Yeah.
But I do have a question about the pond that we're talking about there. It seems to me that if all this runoff's coming off the roads, there's going to be oil and grease and fuel that's going to be in this pond, so it doesn't seem like it's going to be a particularly healthy pond.
It will be similar to most of your stormwater ponds. So if you've seen any wet pond in a neighborhood, generally most of that runoff, the oily runoff and things, comes in, they call it the first flush. It's a quarter-inch rainfall. So they happen pretty frequently, and so you don't get a big load at one time. There is some base flow, so it's like a running water in that pipe system, so it will cycle a lot of times. People tell us that this used to be a marsh before, or like a bog wet area before the dorms were built, which I believe. So we'll have some flushing. We're going to be planning some. One nice thing about being here and being in a university town is that we have the Delaware Water Research Center is out of UD, and we're going to be working with them to do research in the property. So they want to do some floating wetlands in there, wetland type plantings around the outside, and those plants will help clean the water. Our permit with the EPA requires us to do these things over time. So even if we don't do this project, we're going to have to do projects to remove those pollutants somewhere, somehow. And doing them here is, we get lots of wins by having this property, and we can tackle a lot of problems at one time.
There's still a lot of information on the website.
Yes.
About the pond. I think we cover some of the information. It's interesting reading, Shelley.
The website would be the same /Rodney instead of /vote.
Yeah, maybe it's linked from the vote, right?
It could be.
Yeah,
I'm not
we'll confirm that.
checking
And one thing with Rodney, so we didn't get into it in a lot of detail, but the way that we arrived at this design was actually through a public process. So last summer we had a series of meetings with the public and basically asked, what do you guys want to see here? One thing that we definitely know we want is a pond, so let's assume we're going to have a pond here that's a certain size. And we sized the pond to take all the runoff from essentially they call it the 10-year storm. So the storm that you should expect to happen once every 10 years. It seems to be happening a little more frequently recently, but it's the 10-year storm. So that was the pond size that we needed. So then we asked, well, what do you want to see around this pond? Do you want to see, we can make the pond bigger and have no parks features. It can't get any smaller, but we could have it the same size with no parks features. You can have extravagant parks features. And they ended up coming up with 3 concept designs. Concept option A or one was I think a little over $6 million, and it had basically the pond, the one trail through here, and this is all on that /Rodney site, and that's pretty much it. This was the middle of the road option at $8 million, and then there was I think an $11 million option that had all the bells and whistles, and we basically polled the group, and the group it was basically anyone that wanted to come to the meetings could provide feedback, and the general feedback from those meetings was that they felt that option 2 was the option that they wanted to go with. So then we took option 2 and presented it to council. So the design, to a certain degree, we tried to guide it to hit minimum standards and things that we knew we needed to include, but the rest of the aesthetic design was really driven by the public participation process.
And you've got a way to keep it decent.
That is a huge challenge that we face up at the reservoir too.
So part of what we've done here, obviously there's a little more tree canopy here than there is at the reservoir, and it's not a guarantee, but from research, most geese like to land and then walk in rather than land right over the water. So that we do have plantings and things around the edge treatment they call them, which also helps with the safety of the pond, but it keeps geese from wanting to come in. There's also, we're looking at aeration type equipment that that'll keep the water moving, so it keeps geese from wanting to go in.
We're also looking at the geese police, so there are dogs that'll come.
And it will be a challenge.
Yeah.
But you're going to probably need strings across here to keep them from landing.
Yeah, so that's what we've done strings up the reservoir, and we've had mixtures all. When we're on it and we keep them there the whole time, they work pretty well, because I guess when the geese have their babies, they lose their flight feathers or something like that, so they have to walk in and out. So they won't go somewhere where they're forced to fly and land on the water. But geese are certainly a problem. The nutrient load that comes with them is an issue. Yeah, definitely. Any other questions? All right. Well,
So what happens, I'm
okay.
sorry,
Yeah,
on
yeah.
slide 41,
Mhm.
what happens after year 2043?
41, you said?
I should be retired by then. Okay, here we go. Oh, slide 41, sorry. So this is the model of a 20-year debt, going off of the current 2018 to 2022 capital plan that we have in place today. So our goal is with the approval of this borrowing, and as I was mentioning earlier, getting our reserves back into line where we need to be, accruing enough cash on hand as we need, realigning our sewer and water rate structure to create more predictable results year over year. Our goal is to mix in small amounts of debt and continue to fund as we are. Worst case scenario, it would be going to the bond market on a frequent basis as early as every 5 years, which is not something that I want to do or we want to do. The city's done a good job in the past of prioritizing, but now we're at the point where we don't have the choice anymore to pay cash and continue with the infrastructure needs that we have. So I truly see this as a holding piece for us to get our financial requirements in line, and then using that opportunity to get them there. And then once we're there, we would have more slower needs to go to the bond market. I'm thinking every 7 to 10 in that range, depending on what needs may pop up. And Tom mentioned earlier, they could change requirements tomorrow on us with the feds.
Yeah, and one of the big issues is, on the water side specifically, we have $100 million worth of water mains that are going to be at or beyond their expected life in the next 15 years. So, I think one of the key for us is going to be trying to stabilize our revenue sources, maybe bring in some new revenue sources. We're working with council right now and the state legislature to potentially get the ability to charge a lodging tax in Newark. Right now, the state limits it to cities with a population greater than 50,000. Well, that really narrows it down in Delaware.
Yeah.
So we want to have the same tools that Wilmington has. So we think we've got a pretty good chance of that at the state right now. And fingers crossed, the county is doing a similar bill. So we're hoping that could be a potential new revenue source for us. There are, Chemours is coming to Star Campus. The new Biopharmaceutical Institute's coming. There could be a lot of industrial growth at Star Campus, and all those new sales will help us pay for some of these without needing to go to the debt market. And a lot of those buildings are set to be constructed before what would be the next debt cliff here in. Really by 2022, most of those should be up and operational. So we'll have a better feel for how much water we're selling them, how much electric we're selling them. So the electric demand for Star Campus, that build out, is expected to be 60% of the city's current electric demand. So they're going to add 60% to how much electric we sell. So it's a huge number. We sell $50 million worth of electric a year, roughly. So we're talking another $30 million in revenue coming in at build out at Star Campus. So it's a big number. And that's all money that would be new, money we've never had. Delmarva served the power there before. So we could use that money to reduce rates, reduce our residential rates, our commercial rates, and help offset some of the rate increases that might be required on our water and our sewer utility. Dave mentioned some of the grants and things that are available through the state revolving loan funds. As soon as you have a loan with them, the whole world opens up of new grants. So they have a low-income support subsidization program. As soon as you have a loan in the water fund, you can get up to $200,000 a year to help low-income residents pay their water bills. Same for the sewer. And I don't know if they have one for stormwater, but that could be $400,000 a year of grants that we get just for having any size loan. You can get more in grant back than you're paying in interest. That's my understanding of that program. They also have a program for asset management. So if you get in, you can get half the interest expense back to fund an asset management program. So, even the debt service that we're paying on these loans, we're going to get back from the state in one way or the other, more than likely. So it's a great program.
Simple question, I didn't hear you, this tax that you're hoping to be able to pick up on for under 50,000.
Yes,
Right.
What was the tax?
it's a lodging tax.
Lodging?
Yes.
I thought you said library.
Sorry, lodging, not a library tax.
Library,
no.
yeah.
Lodging
So
tax.
we have just under 1,000 hotel rooms in the city, about 950, I think, to be exact. So a 1% lodging tax fee based on occupancy of like 60% would bring us about $225,000 a year. A 3% would be $675, which is equivalent to a 10% tax increase. So it's significant, and it would be a huge windfall for the city, help us reduce some of our dependency of our utilities onto our general fund to fund the police and parks and so forth. So.
Yeah, one thing a lot of people don't know is how much, so we only bring in about $7 million a year in property taxes. The cost for refuse collection is $2 million. The cost for our police service is over $14 million. So it costs us almost $2 to have police to every $1 we get from tax revenue. So any source that we can get to diversify our general fund revenue, like the lodging tax, will go a long way towards being able to support those critical general fund services, police, trash collection, that sort of thing.
Right, so right now, about 1/5 of our residents don't pay enough in their taxes to pay for trash service. So we're trying to help fill those buckets a little bit with
It costs
other
us about
sources.
$300 a year to pick up trash from each house in the city. So the median tax bill in the city is $515. I know this one's near and dear to Stu's heart.
There's nobody that's paying less than
Yeah.
tax collection in this district.
Yeah.
Probably
So-
multiples of the average here.
Yeah. So about 20% are
Thank you for
below
that.
$300 a
Thank you.
year.
I might add, while we're talking about that, you've got excellent services. Trash.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And that's something we hear a lot, and it's something that we want to maintain. And
Well,
yeah.
I'm saying that I've been many places, and the street was dry after it snowed before I even bothered to go out that morning. And it had been plowed during the night. So, excellent.
I
Thank
actually stopped and asked 2 of our employees today if they would trade all the winter snow overtime for days like today every day, and they said yes.
So they're a good crew, and you can see it, you've got good equipment, and it's something to be proud of.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well, I thank everybody for coming out. We'll stick around for a little while if
Yeah.
anyone's got any questions they didn't feel comfortable asking in front of the group.